The Vakar Empire had made many enemies in its long and brutal history. They had crushed lesser civilizations, bullied neutral planets, and dictated the terms of peace to species that dared resist their will. But in all their years of conquest, they had never encountered a species like humanity. That was about to change. Started as a minor diplomatic dispute, hardly worth noting in the grand history of interstellar politics. The Terran delegation, led by Ambassador Julian Carter, had arrived on Vakar Prime to finalize trade agreements that would allow Terran industries access to the Vakar's vast mineral wealth. Negotiations were tense but progressing, with both sides pushing for better terms. Then, something went terribly wrong. During a routine security check at the embassy compound, Vakar enforcers stopped a human child, Alex Carter, Julian's 8-year-old son, citing concerns over unregistered biological anomalies. The child was scanned, and the results triggered an automated flag in the Vakar security system. Within moments, heavily armed officers surrounded the embassy. Julian barely had time to react before his son was ripped from his arms. This child exhibits unexplained genetic markers, the Vakar captain declared. His voice was cold, analytical. Until further analysis is conducted, he must be placed in protective custody. Julian protested, furious. The embassy's security team demanded answers, but the Vakar were unmoved. To them, human objections were irrelevant. Their empire had operated for millennia under one simple rule. They did as they pleased, and no one stopped them. They had just made the gravest miscalculation in their history. A diplomatic nightmare turns into a galactic crisis. News of Alex's detainment reached Earth within hours. First, the UNSC assumed it was a simple bureaucratic mistake, the kind that could be smoothed over with back-channel negotiations. The first message from the Vakar, however, shattered that illusion. The child is not a prisoner, their High Council declared. He is a biological specimen of interest. We will conduct further analysis and determine an appropriate course of action. There was no apology, no explanation, no intention of releasing him. The response from Earth was immediate and unequivocal. The UNSC transmitted a single demand: return the child immediately. No delays, no conditions. The Vakar laughed. They had seen many species beg for the return of their lost citizens, only to fold under pressure. They had no reason to believe humanity would be any different. They were wrong. The Black Sky Armada mobilizes. While the Vakar debated their next move, humanity was already preparing its response. Earth had many strengths: ingenuity, adaptability, diplomacy, but above all else, it had an unbreakable sense of loyalty to its own. Within 24 hours, the first Terran warships departed from Sol. Within 48 hours, a full battle group had assembled at the edge of Vakar space. Within 72 hours, hundreds of warships had darkened the stars above the Vakar border. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. No species had ever launched a full-scale military mobilization over one individual. To the other empires of the galaxy, such an action was unthinkable, illogical. But for humanity, there was no calculation needed. Alex Carter was one of them. And that was all that mattered. A warning ignored. Humanity's fleet arrived at the Vakar border. Another transmission was sent, this time from Admiral Elias Graves, Supreme Commander of the UNC Navy. His words were sharp, unwavering. "Return the child. Now." The Vakar response was dismissive. Their High Council issued a condescending reply, warning humanity to stand down before they embarrass themselves. A moment later, the Terran fleet took a step forward, warships advancing in perfect unison, their weapons charged. The message was clear. Humanity was not asking. They were telling. And for the first time in their long history, the Vakar realized they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The halls of the United Nations Stellar Command were silent as the Emergency Council convened. No one spoke as the transmission from the Vakar High Council played again on the main screen. The human child is not a prisoner. He is a specimen. His genetic markers indicate an anomaly of interest to science. We will conduct further analysis and determine the appropriate course of action. The room bristled with tension. The Vakar had not just refused Earth's demand. They had dismissed it entirely, treating humanity's protest as little more than background noise. At the head of the table, Fleet Admiral Elias Graves leaned forward, his voice like steel. "What's the latest update from our embassy?" A diplomatic aide shook her head. "The Vakar have cut off all direct communication. The ambassador and his staff are under protective observation, which means they're trapped." Graves exhaled sharply. He had expected as much. The Vakar were old players in the game of galactic politics, and they wielded bureaucracy like a weapon. They thought time was on their side, that humanity would stall in endless negotiations while they dissected the situation on their own terms. They were wrong. He turned to his executive officer. "How soon can we move?" "Task Force Orion is already in position. The rest of the fleet is mobilizing. If we get the order, we'll be at the Vakar border in less than 72 hours. The fleet had moved fast. Faster than most would have thought possible. But then, humanity had always been underestimated. And now, the Vakar were about to find out what that meant. The sky darkens with warships. When the first Terran ships arrived at the Vakar border, the local defense outposts scrambled to respond. Sensors flared as dozens, then hundreds, of human warships emerged from hyperspace. They came in waves. Destroyers and frigates in tight formation, battleships looming like giants. Carrier groups positioned to unleash their deadly payloads. And at the heart of it all, the UNSC dreadnought, Indomitable, a leviathan of war that dwarfed the Vakar's own flagship. The Vakar Border Command went into high alert. Warfleet mobilization codes were issued, planetary shields were raised, and messages flooded the Vakar High Council. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They were here to collect their child. First contact, this time not so friendly. A direct transmission cut across all Vakar military channels. The image of Admiral Graves appeared on their screens, his expression carved from stone. "This is Admiral Graves of the United Nations Stellar Command. You have precisely 2 hours to return the child unharmed. If you do not comply, we will retrieve him ourselves. You will not like the method we choose." The transmission ended. The Vakar commanders hesitated. The humans had arrived faster than expected. Their fleet was larger than projected, and their tone, no pleasantries, no diplomacy, just cold certainty, made something primal stir in the Vakar's reptilian brains. The first time in centuries, the Vakar felt the stirrings of fear. The Vakar gamble and miscalculate. The High Council was divided. Some argued for immediate negotiations. Others scoffed at the idea of bending to human demands. After all, no other species had ever dared to go to war over a single individual. The Vakar had detained diplomats, scholars, and even entire families from weaker civilizations before. None had responded like this. To them, it was a bluff. The humans might have a fleet, but they wouldn't risk open war, not over a child. So they sent their reply. Your demands are unreasonable. The child will remain under Vakar protection until our scientists have completed their study. Any act of aggression will be considered an act of war. The transmission barely had time to reach the human flagship before the UNSC fleet advanced. The humans had their answer, and now the Vakar would have theirs. A single strike sends a message. The first shot came not from a human warship, but from a planetary defense battery on the Vakar border world of Corin 5. A bold warning shot, meant to scare the Terrans back to the negotiation table. Was a critical mistake. Without hesitation, the UNSC dreadnought Indomitable responded with a single barrage, not aimed at a ship, not aimed at a city, but at the primary orbital defense platform above Corin 5. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. A massive fireball tore through the structure, sending debris scattering into the void. In an instant, the Vakar's primary defense hub was gone. Humanity's message was clear. You will not fire on us without consequence. And it rippled through the Vakar ranks. The High Council's chamber erupted in frantic debate. They had assumed the humans would hesitate, that they would posture, stall, or retreat. Instead, the humans had answered aggression with overwhelming force. And they weren't finished yet. A deadline approaches. Back on Earth, news of the strike spread like wildfire. The people of the Terran Republic were watching, waiting, and demanding action. Across human colonies, the message was the same: bring Alex home. The UNSC's deadline approached, and the Vakar were running out of options. Render the child, or see just how far humanity was willing to go. For the first time in their history, the Vakar were learning a painful lesson. You do not take from humanity and expect to keep it. The Vakar had seen war before. They had crushed rebellions, waged campaigns of conquest, and subjugated countless species beneath the weight of their empire. To them, warfare was a slow and methodical process. Sieges, blockades, and careful diplomacy used to break an enemy's spirit before a single shot was fired. But humanity didn't play by those rules. And now, the skies above the Vakar homeworld darkened with the largest foreign fleet their species had ever seen. The arrival of the Indomitable. The first warning came when long-range sensors detected multiple hyperspace disturbances at the edge of Vakar territory. Within minutes, the readings escalated, hundreds of warships translating in, their signatures unmistakably Terran. Then came the shadow of something far worse. The UNSC Indomitable, humanity's largest dreadnought, emerged from hyperspace like a leviathan. was a monster of metal and firepower, its hull black as the void, its cannons large enough to crack moons. It dwarfed anything in the Vakar fleet, radiating a simple, undeniable message. There is nowhere to run. The Indomitable's arrival was not just a show of force. It was a declaration, a promise that the patience of humanity was over. Panic in the High Council. Inside the grand chambers of the Vakar High Council, chaos erupted. Military commanders scrambled to make sense of the sheer scale of the human fleet. Advisors screamed over one another, debating what course of action to take. Some urged diplomacy, but others still clung to arrogance. They cannot possibly sustain this level of mobilization. One councillor hissed, "It's a bluff. No species would commit an entire war fleet for a single life." A sudden alert silenced the room. A new transmission had arrived. Admiral Graves' face filled the chamber's main screen, his expression unreadable, his voice calm and controlled. "This is the United Nations Stellar Command. You have 1 hour remaining. Return the child, unharmed. Now." The transmission ended without another word. The High Council had never been given an ultimatum like this before. Normally, they were the ones issuing threats, dictating terms, deciding who lived and who died. But now the tables had turned, and they did not like how it felt. The Vakar prepare for the unthinkable. Despite the growing fear among their ranks, the Vakar military was still a force to be reckoned with. Their fleet, while outgunned, was well trained and heavily fortified. Their planetary defenses had repelled invasions before. And yet, as they scrambled into battle positions, doubt crept into their minds. The humans had already destroyed an orbital defense platform without hesitation. What would they do next? Deep in the command bunker beneath the High Council chambers, Supreme Fleet Marshal Korak studied the battlefield displays. His clawed fingers tapped against the console as he watched human ships take precise formation, encircling the planet in a display of pure strategic dominance. He turned to his second-in-command. "How many ships are we facing?" The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Current estimates suggest nearly 500. Korak's eyes narrowed. "And our fleet?" 212, sir." A pause. "And most are not built for prolonged engagement against dreadnought-class vessels." Korak exhaled slowly. The humans had come not just to fight, but to win. And perhaps to eradicate. A show of power. Just as the Council was preparing their next response, something else happened. Something that sent an unmistakable warning across the entire planet. One of the Vakar's largest military space stations, Outpost Karvesh, sat in high orbit over the homeworld, its weapons primed and aimed at the human fleet. It was a symbol of Vakar dominance. Unbreakable, untouchable. And in the blink of an eye, it was gone. A single shot from the Indomitable's forward mass driver lanced through the station like a spear through flesh. The explosion tore the station in half, its wreckage tumbling down toward the planet's surface. Debris rained across the sky, burning through the atmosphere like falling stars. It wasn't an act of war. The galaxy had watched as humanity forced an empire to its knees. The Vakar, once feared conquerors, had been humiliated without a single Terran life lost. Their surrender had been absolute, their fear undeniable. But the repercussions of that day did not fade with the return of Alex Carter, If anything, they had only begun. Because power shifts like these did not happen quietly, and humanity had made an enemy that would never forget its humiliation. A bitter council. In the aftermath of their defeat, the Vakar High Council sat in near silence. No one spoke of what had happened. No one dared mention the name human in anything other than a hushed, resentful whisper. For centuries, the Vakar had dictated the course of galactic affairs. They had waged wars that reshaped entire sectors. They had broken civilizations beneath their rule. And now, they had been reduced to nothing in the face of human wrath. Fleet Marshal Korak stood at the head of the chamber, his yellow eyes scanning the gathered leaders. He had no patience for their self-pity. "We have been disgraced," he said, "but disgrace is not the end." Councillor Varish, still seething from the surrender, slammed his fist against the table. "We should have fought. We should have shown them that the Vakar do not kneel." Korak's voice was like steel. "If we had fought, you would not be standing here. None of us would." Varesh snarled, but did not argue further. He knew it was true. Korak continued, "Humanity has shown us what they are willing to do for a single life. We must consider what that means." His gaze swept the chamber. "We are no longer their predators. We are their prey." The words left a cold silence in their wake. But some of the council members did not accept this fate. In the shadows they plotted. The humans may have won this battle, but war had not been declared. Not yet. The galaxy takes notice. As news of the Vakar's surrender spread, reactions across the stars varied. Some empires were horrified, realizing just how dangerous humanity could be when provoked. Others were fascinated, taking notes, analyzing their tactics. And then there were those who saw opportunity. The Vakar had been weakened, their reputation shattered, their political alliances wavered. Neighboring factions who had once feared them now questioned their authority. Some began whispering about breaking away from the Empire altogether. Revolts stirred on the edges of Vakar space. Border skirmishes broke out. Former vassals who had long endured their rule saw the perfect moment to strike back. And at the center of it all, the Vakar knew exactly who had caused this. Their empire had survived countless wars, but in a single day, humanity had dealt them a wound deeper than any they had ever suffered before. And the galaxy was watching to see if they would survive it. Alex Carver's new reality. Back aboard the UNSC Indomitable, Alex Carver sat in his father's quarters, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the stars. He had barely spoken since his rescue. The weight of everything that had happened still pressed down on him. His father sat beside him. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" Alex hesitated before finally asking, "Did we start a war?" Julian Carter exhaled. "Oh, not yet." He rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "But we changed things. People won't look at us the same way anymore." Alex swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing. The unspoken threat. Admiral Graves had seen many battles in his lifetime. He had made countless enemies. But as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, he knew this victory was different. Humanity had made a statement. And while fear would keep many at bay, he also knew the truth of war. Fear breeds resentment, and resentment festers. The Vakar would not dare move against humanity immediately. But one day, someone, whether the Vakar or another enemy, would challenge them again. And when that day came, humanity would have to prove itself all over again. And now, though, the message had been delivered, loud and clear. Don't touch what belongs to humanity. The seeds of the future. As the Indomitable prepared to leave Vakar space, a final encrypted transmission was sent from the Vakar capital. It was brief. A single message. We will not forget this. Somewhere in the depths of the galaxy, the next war had already begun. Not with weapons, not with fleets, but with whispers, with hatred, with the slow, smouldering hunger for vengeance. Humanity had won today. But tomorrow? Tomorrow was coming. The galaxy had shifted. The Vakar Empire, once unchallenged, now stood fractured, its authority questioned. Humanity had proven itself not just a force to be reckoned with, but a power capable of rewriting the political landscape with a single act of wrath. But in the void, anger did not die so easily. It burned, smouldering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to ignite once more. And in the darkest corners of the Vakar Empire, that moment was coming. The Black Council rises. The Vakar High Council had accepted its humiliation, but not all of the Empire agreed. From the capital, deep within a hidden warship construction yard orbiting a dead world, figures gathered in secret. They called themselves the Black Council, a coalition of military hardliners, ousted admirals, and intelligence officers who refused to let the Empire's disgrace go unanswered. Fleet Marshal Korak stood before them, his scaled face cold, unreadable. He had once spoken against defying humanity, but now he saw the reality before him. We do not have the strength to challenge the humans directly, Korak said, his voice calm but firm. They wield power unlike anything we have faced. His golden eyes narrowed. But wars are not always won through direct battles. A former admiral, one who had lost command after the surrender, hissed, "What are you suggesting?" Korak stepped forward. "We make them bleed in the shadows. We strike not as an empire, but as ghosts. Let the humans believe they are safe." His claws tapped against the table. "Then, when the time is right, we remind them that even gods can fall." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The war had not ended. It had merely changed its shape. The ambassador's warning. Julian Carter had seen what the Vakar were capable of. He had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of interstellar diplomacy, had brokered fragile peace deals, had watched entire civilizations fall to ruin. So he knew one thing for certain. The Vakar's silence was not peace. It was the eye of a storm. Standing before the United Terran Council on Earth, he delivered his message without hesitation. "You must not mistake their surrender for submission," Carter said, his voice steady but urgent. "We forced them into a corner, yes. We showed them our strength." He scanned the faces of Earth's most powerful leaders. But history tells us what happens when a wounded beast is left to heal in the dark. Some members of the council were skeptical. "Are you suggesting we strike preemptively?" one of them asked. Carter shook his head. "No, I'm saying we prepare." Silence filled the chamber. And then The Supreme Chancellor of the UTC leaned forward. Then we prepare. Across the Terran fleets, new orders were issued. Humanity would not be caught off guard. Shadows among the stars. Months passed. The Vakar remained quiet, their empire seemingly focused on repairing the damage done by their surrender. Trade resumed, diplomatic talks were reopened, and, for the outside galaxy, things appeared to be stabilizing. But in the void, ships vanished. Human outposts in deep space went silent, their distress beacons never reaching home. Small colonies, ones that barely registered on the galactic map, were wiped out with surgical precision. No trace of the attackers, no wreckage, no evidence. Just the chilling realization that someone was watching, waiting. The bridge of the UNSC Indomitable, Admiral Graves studied the latest reports. His expression was grim. "We're being hunted." The officers around him remained silent. They all knew what this meant. The war had already begun. And this time it wouldn't be fought in the open. A child no longer. Alex Carter had changed. Since his return, nightmares plagued his sleep, whispers of cold steel corridors and reptilian eyes watching him in the dark. He no longer saw the galaxy as he once did, as a place of discovery and wonder. Now he saw it as it truly was. Dangerous. Unforgiving. A place where the weak were devoured. Sitting in his father's study, he turned to Julian. "I want to be trained," Alex said. His father hesitated. "You don't have to do this." Alex's eyes burned with quiet determination. "They took me once." He clenched his fists. "I won't let it happen again." Julian saw something in his son that hadn't been there before, a fire, a resolve that couldn't be broken. And deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning. The first strike? At the edge of Vakar space, a human freighter traveled through an isolated system. It was a routine mission until alarms blared through the ship. A massive energy surge. Something was coming. Then, out of the void, a darkened warship emerged. It bore no insignia, no transmission codes. It was neither Vakar nor pirate. It was something else. And before the freighter's crew could react, their ship was gone, ripped apart in an instant. The war had begun again, not with a declaration, not with an invasion, but with a whisper in the dark. And humanity was listening. War had returned to the galaxy, but this time it wore a mask. There were no official declarations, no fleets engaging in open battle, only whispers in the void and the cold efficiency of unseen hands striking in the dark. The Black Council's plan was unfolding with terrifying precision. Humanity's enemies no longer sought to fight them directly. Instead, they struck from the shadows, erasing entire ships, silencing colonies, and ensuring that no one knew where the next attack would come from. But humanity had learned from its past. It would not wait for the storm to break over its head. It would chase the storm to its source and burn it to the ground. The missing fleet. On the bridge of the UNSC Indomitable, Admiral Elias Graves analyzed the most recent attack patterns. In the last 2 weeks alone, 5 human freighters, 2 science stations, and a military escort group had vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no distress calls, no survivors. His second-in-command, Commander Alana Redding, crossed her arms. This isn't piracy. Pirates don't erase entire ships. They take the cargo and leave bodies. Graves nodded. This isn't about resources. It's about fear. His fingers tapped against the console. They're testing us. Then we should give them an answer, Redding said. Graves turned to her, a cold smile forming. Oh, we will. Humanity's new hunters. In response to the escalating attacks, a new directive was issued across the Terran fleet. It was classified under the highest clearance, known only to a handful of admirals and intelligence officers. Project Revenant. Humanity's response to the Shadow War was not another grand fleet or brute force retaliation. Instead, they created something else, ghosts of their own. Special Forces units were deployed to track down the attackers, operating outside standard fleet regulations. They answered to no one but the highest levels of command. They had one mission: find the Black Council, end them. And they would not fail. A ghost in the dark. Deep in the outer rim, an unidentified ship drifted near an asteroid belt, a Vakar strike craft disguised as a civilian transport. It had just finished a hit-and-run attack on a Terran research station, leaving nothing behind but scorched metal and silence. The crew, proud of their victory, celebrated in the dimly lit mess hall. Laughter echoed through the ship, until the lights flickered. A low hum filled the air. The temperature dropped. Then a voice. You shouldn't have done that. The Vakar warriors barely had time to react before the ship's power failed. Emergency lights bathed the room in blood-red hues as the sound of boots echoed through the halls. The first guard barely had time to draw his weapon before a blade slid across his throat. Panic spread. Gunfire erupted, but the shots hit nothing. The attackers moved like shadows, silent, precise, deadly. Within 3 minutes, the Vakar crew was dead. The last survivor, clutching a wound in his side, gasped as a figure knelt beside him. His vision blurred, but he saw the mark on their armor. A skull, a spectre wreathed in fire. Terran Revenant operatives. As the life drained from his eyes, he realized too late. Humanity had learned to play this game too. And they played it better. The Web Titans. With each passing day, the Shadow War escalated. The Vakar Black Council's assassins, saboteurs, and hidden fleets continued their work, but they no longer moved unopposed. Kree strike was met with an even deadlier response. Our care officers vanished from their own warships. Supply depots erupted in flames. Entire cells of the Black Council went dark, their operatives never heard from again. Fear, once their greatest weapon, now turned against them. For the first time, the Black Council realized the truth. They weren't the hunters anymore. They were the prey. A child's resolve. At Earth, Alex Carter trained harder than ever. No longer just the son of an ambassador, he had thrown himself into combat training, strategy, and intelligence analysis. He had made a decision. Today, he would join Project Revenant. One day, he would hunt the monsters that had stolen him. His father, Julian Carter, watched with conflicted emotions: pride, fear, resignation. because he knew that no matter how hard he tried to keep Alex safe, his son had already chosen his path, and nothing could stop him now. The beginning of the end. In the depths of Vakar space, the Black Council convened once more. Fleet Marshal Korak's expression was grim as he studied the latest reports. "We underestimated them," he admitted. Councillor Varish, once full of arrogance, now looked shaken. "They are relentless." Korak's claws tapped against the table. "Then we must change our strategy." For months they had waged war in the shadows, but humanity had met them at every turn. They had fought darkness with darkness. It was clear now. They wanted to survive. They could not hide anymore. It was time to strike humanity where it hurt most. And so, with a single command, the Black Council abandoned their silent war. The time for whispers was over. The time for fire and blood had come. The shadows had been burned away. The hidden war had failed. Now, the Black Council had no choice but to fight the one battle they had been desperate to avoid, a direct war with humanity. And so, they abandoned secrecy. They would strike where it hurt, not on the battlefield, not against warships, but against the heart of humanity itself. The day Earth burned, it started with a silence. Earth's orbital defense stations, a web of satellites, spaceports, and weapon platforms, were the most advanced security grid in the known galaxy. Nothing entered Sol without being detected. But at 300 Terran Standard Time, something changed. A wave of false signals flooded the network. Phantom ships, non-existent fleets, sensor ghosts. Alarms blared across Earth's orbital command, commanders scrambling to verify threats that didn't exist. And then the real attack came. 20 Vakar stealth cruisers emerged from slipspace inside Earth's defensive perimeter. They had hidden behind the sensor noise, slipping through the cracks of the most secure system in existence. They did not come to conquer. They came to kill. Mass drivers roared, orbital stations were obliterated before they could react, and massive tungsten rods, kinetic weapons designed to mimic meteor strikes, were hurled toward Earth's surface. The first impact struck New Berlin. The second annihilated northern India. The third hurtled toward Washington, D.C. Billions died in an instant. The Black Council had sent a message. We are not prey. We are your reckoning. The wrath of the Terran war machine. But they had made one mistake. They thought they could break humanity's spirit. Instead, they forged its vengeance. The retaliation was immediate. Every Terran fleet, from deep space patrols to home defense forces, was mobilized in under an hour. Hundreds of warships surged toward Vakar space. This was no longer a political conflict, no longer a territorial dispute. This was extinction-level war, and the Vakar were not ready. The fall of the Black Council. On the bridge of the UNSC Indomitable, Admiral Graves stood before a holographic display of Vakar Prime, the enemy's homeworld. The fleet was in position. There would be no negotiations. "Admiral," Commander Redding said, her voice cold, "final confirmation from Earth. The Chancellor has authorized total war." Graves gave a single nod. "Then we end this." Across the fleet, thousands of railguns hummed to life. NAC cannons charged, each one carrying enough force to crack a planet's crust. Dropships launched, carrying Revenant operatives on missions of assassination and sabotage. The Black Council had wanted open war. Now they would drown in it. The last stand? Vakar Prime's skies burned. The Terran fleet descended like a storm of fire, obliterating orbital defenses in minutes. The Black Council's warships, once so fearsome, were outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. In the capital city, Fleet Marshal Korik watched from his war room. Reports flooded in, one after another, all the same. Losses, collapses, total annihilation. He clenched his claws. "If we are to fall," he growled, "then we will take as many of them with us as we can." The last order was given. Every remaining ship, every last soldier was sent into the fight. A final, desperate suicide charge. Retribution. The Vakar fleet lunged toward the Terran warships, but they never made it. Orbital MAC rounds carved through their formations, turning entire cruisers into debris fields before they could fire a single shot. The human fleet advanced with calculated, merciless precision, dismantling what remained of the enemy. And the final order came. Destroy the planet. Graves hesitated for only a moment. Then he spoke the words that would mark the end of an era. Fire. The Yamato cannon, Earth's deadliest orbital weapon, discharged in a single blinding beam. The core of Vakar Prime ignited, cracking open like glass. The war was over. The Vakar Empire was no more. A survivor's choice. Days later, in the ruins of what had once been the enemy's capital, Julian Carter and his son Alex stood among the rubble. Alex had seen death before, but nothing like this. The streets were empty, the skies blackened with ash. This was what humanity's wrath looked like. Turned to his son. This is what war costs. Alex nodded slowly. And this is why we have to be the ones who win it. Julian looked at him, something unreadable in his expression. And if we become the monsters in the process? Alex didn't hesitate. We won't. Because in the end, humanity had not just survived. It had conquered, and the stars would never forget it.